You never know. All right. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Pete Cyprian. I have a wife, Nancy. I have three, I guess you would call them grown children. Daughter, 26, got married last April. A son, 24, and a son that's 20 and a half, he tells me. So, anyway, my wife and I have been involved in the Awana ministry since 1985. We began before we ever had any of those children, serving in a small church, probably about the size of your church right here. And I worked for the military, and so we've done this ministry in Texas and California 3 times, here in Georgia. We've done it in Hawaii, and we've done it in Germany. So we've seen the ministry work everywhere we've ever been. So children's ministry is one of those things that a lot of people, even our pastors, sometimes don't understand the importance of what we're trying to do with our children. And this is one of the most important ministries there is. I'll give you some numbers that'll talk about that later. But let me ask you a question. What happens, first off, who is supposed to instruct their children? What does the Bible tell us? Parents. If you have your Bibles and you want to turn, I always, I don't want to take the pastor's time without at least reading some scripture tonight and talking about that. But I'm in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and specifically verses 4 through 9 we'll look at. But in here it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thy heart. Then thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thy eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the post of thy house and on thy gates." You think he left out anything in there? We're to be a witness, a testimony. We should be teaching our children, this says, from the time we get them up in the morning to the time we put them back to bed at night. We ought to be telling them about what a great God we have and what a great God we serve. Because what happens if we don't teach them? You've decided to look at the Awana ministry and hopefully use it here in your church. Why did you make that decision? Because you want to bring them up in the things of the Lord. What happens if you didn't make that decision? I'm not going to take you there now, but if you went in Joshua, you would see in Joshua what happens, and it's throughout the Old Testament. But right before the people went in the Promised Land, what did he remind them of? He reminds them not to forsake the Lord thy God. But what happened? The people went in the Promised Land when he sent them to receive their inheritance. It was only 2 generations before it says they knew not the Lord. So it only took them 2 generations to walk away from the Lord. Here in our country, they've said we've already lost 2 generations. 2 generations we've already lost, and we can't afford to lose any more. Just some numbers I wanted to share with you before I get into the specifics of the club, just so you're aware of how important ministering to children are, because I think you have to understand this to understand the importance of what you're going to be doing. But there's what we call, now it's a 4-12 window. But between the ages of 4 and the ages of 12, about 85% of all those people that ever come to know Christ will do so between those ages. About 10 years ago, it was a 4-18 window. 2 years ago, that was a 4-14 window. Right now, it's down to a 4-12. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the world is capturing our children's attention, their imagination. Is distracting them away from the things of the Lord at an earlier and earlier age. George Barna, who's a Christian researcher, says that by age 9, a child has their spiritual moorings in place. By age 9, It's already in place. And then he says also by age 13, whatever our children believe at age 13, for the majority of them, that's what they'll die believing. They won't change. Does that mean we shouldn't reach out to adults as well as children? Yeah, we need to do that. I have an 84-year-old father that I talked to today that's still not a Christian. He lives in Mississippi. I don't see him that much, but I pray for him every day. My mom, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My mom wasn't a Christian either. She died at 78, and 3 months before she passed away, she received Christ. So we want to go after all people, not just children. We want to go after adults too. But the numbers show us that those that are going to receive Christ are more likely going to do it when they're little, because they're not ashamed. They're not inhibited by anything. The world hasn't gotten them if we can get to them early enough. The other thing I was going to tell you is that you know that, I don't know if you've heard these numbers. There's several studies out there that back this up. But after your young people finish high school, within 4 years of finishing high school, a minimum, a half of them are going to walk away from your church and their faith. Southern Baptist Association did their own study. They said 88% is what they lose. Josh McDowell, who does a lot of youth ministry work, Josh McDowell says 92%. So all those numbers are way more than we can afford to lose. But that's what's happening to our young people. So at this age, that I'm going to show you the Awana ministry, and it's critical that we ground them in the Word of God so they can stand strong and they won't walk away from their faith. I'm just going to kind of run through the ministry. Our youngest ministry, we call it Puggles. Puggles is a 2-year-old ministry, and you might say, well, what can you teach a 2-year-old? You'll be surprised if you haven't taught them. But really, our Puggles ministry, you know what this is really about? This is more than about teaching those kids. This is about mom and dad. What our Puggles ministry does is when they come to Puggles, they'll have a lesson card, and I don't have the big card here. They have a big card, a lesson card that the teacher teaches off of, a lesson, and the whole night from the minute they come in to the minute they go home, it's very structured. It gives that teacher the message to give, the Bible verse to do. It gives them suggested snacks to go with the message. It gives them suggested game times to go with the message. And that's the way Puggles work. But what happens, these are what we call take-home cards. So the lesson that your Puggle would learn at church tonight, you send one of these cards home with mom and dad, and there's 5 more lessons on there for them to teach at home. So what this does is take a young parent of a young child and teaches them to do the Word of God in their home, to do a devotion and a study, and it's all laid out for them. That's our Puggles ministry, 2-year-olds, and they just get a little T-shirt that looks like that. Our Cubbies group, this is their little uniform, their Cubby vest. This is 3 and 4-year-olds. 3 and 4-year-olds. And I don't have their handbook up here. I have the teaching book, and then I have what we call their entrance booklet. Every one of these clubs has an entrance booklet. What the entrance booklet to the program is the gospel. On the back of this is a big gospel presentation. In every entrance booklet that I'll show you, the gospel is there, because that's the first thing we want to bring home with all the children that we minister to. But Cubbies is 3 and 4-year-olds, and is built just like Puggles. From the minute they come in that night until the minute they go home, there's a plan on everything that you're going to do with those kids. So all you have to do is really follow that plan, because we use a method there we call total time teaching, which means everything they do that night, there's a lesson in it. So that's 3 and 4-year-olds. They have one handbook. They all move through that book at the same pace. And there's at least one Bible verse every week that they're going to have to memorize. And there's there's a long form of that verse for the kids that probably the 4-year-olds that can graft a little bit more. For the 3-year-olds that maybe not be able to get that whole verse, as a short version. Our next age group is what we call our Sparkies. Our Sparkies are K-5 first and second graders. They wear a little red vest, and they get wings and jewels and other things that get to go on this vest. It's a 3-year curriculum because they're in their K-5 first and second grade. So they get 3 different handbooks. This is the first handbook. It's called Hang Glider. In the 3 years that they're in Sparkies, they're going to go through the entire Bible. It's going to begin in Genesis, and it'll work all the way through the Bible. All of their Bible verses and their stories are on a CD. So even if they can't read, you can put it into your CD player, and they can hear the verse repeated over and over and over again to them. So everything's on there. So 3 years, all the way through the Bible in those 3 years. Okay. And then they have their entrance booklet. This is what their entrance booklet looks like. It's John 3:16, basically. We call it Flight 316, but that's the first verse that a Sparky's going to learn. Our next age group is what we call TNT, or Ultimate Adventure Series. And there's 2 books in this. They wear this soccer-style jersey, and then they have book 1 and book 2. So this is meant to be go through 1 book a year. And again, they'll have Bible verses, they'll have Bible readings, activities, drills that they have to do. And again, they have what we call an entrance booklet that they first start out in. And again, this is a big gospel tract that's going to hopefully help you to lead them to Christ if they already don't know Him. And then our next ministry within TNT is our 5th and 6th grade ministry. A lot of churches only use the 5th grade part of this, but that's up to you. It goes all the way through 6th grade. Again, the books look a little bit different. The kids are a little bit older in here, but the structure's the same. And then they use a blue soccer-style jersey. And then they have different patches and awards that go on their uniforms. I didn't bring all of my middle school stuff tonight, but Awana goes all the way through high school. So we don't really stop with this here. We have what we call Trek, which is a middle school ministry, and it's a flexible ministry. It can be 2 years or 3 years. So it can be 6th, 7th, and 8th, or 7th and 8th grade. And then our high school is 9th through 12th grade. And so we go all the way through, or the way we put it 2 ways. We start out, we go from 2 to 18, or we go from diapers to diplomas with our ministry. And in some cases, if you live long enough, it's diapers to diapers. So, but, so anyway, that's our ministry is all about the 2 focal points of our ministry is presentation of the gospel and the scripture memory. That's the heartbeat. Now the kids, what get them excited? They like the uniforms, they like the awards, and they like the fun time that they're going to have when you come. And on Awana nights, typically it's up to you as a church to decide how you structure it, but it's based on about an hour and a half time frame. Some churches do an hour and 15, some churches do 2 full hours. So it's really up to you and your structure here. But it's meant to be made up of 3 major segments. One is what we call the handbook time. That's the time that you're going to be sitting down with the kids, and they're going to be saying their Bible verses back to you. And those that aren't prepared, that means you're going to be teaching them those verses. Okay? That's handbook time. Then we have what we call a large group time. A large group time is like a children's church. Excuse me. They're going to hear a gospel message, and then you might sing songs with them. You might do a Bible drill with them, do announcements, do anything like you would do in a church-type setting, in a large group setting. And then the third element is that game time, which is one of the drawing cards. Game time can happen in a parking lot, it can happen in the grass, it can happen in your fellowship hall, it can happen anywhere. But the Awana, the Awana-style games are kind of unique. You have the space. Awana is based on a 4-team concept, unlike most sports or anything else. It's one team against one team. Awana is unique in that it does a 4-team concept. So that's a quick introduction to our ministry. I really wanted to get through this a little bit and then leave time for you to ask me questions about the ministry, about how many of you have been exposed to it before. Raise your hand if you have any knowledge of it. Okay, so a few. All right. So I wanted to leave time to give you some question and answers, about how it actually operates, how it runs. So any questions I can answer for you.
What would the middle school section be started? Same time?
A lot of churches will do their middle or high school focus on a different night. Some of them do it all the same night. Sometimes they do it on a different night because what we encourage, our Awana pledge says that we want to train children to serve Christ. So what we do with a lot of clubs will do with their youth is they'll put them back in this younger club right here serving, and they'll do their focus on a different night. Or they'll just do their Bible part of their focus that night, and the rest of the night they may be in here serving with the younger kids. But that's up to you. We have some that do it all, the whole thing in one night, so it's really up to you. Yes, sir.
How many people does it actually take to run Awanas for, especially the younger kids? You have, teacher helpers. How many people does it take?
We usually say 10 to 2. 2 adults per 10 kids, or you can break it to 1 to 5, but we usually say 2 to 10 because the child protection issues, you always want to have 2. You don't want to have one adult in a room with kids and by themselves. So, but about a 1 to 5 ratio. And again, that really depends on the kids, and that depends on the adults. Some adults can handle more than that. Some adults don't give them more than 1 or 2, and that's it. That's all they can handle. So. No, it's meant to be the club is meant to run an hour and a half to 2 hours, really. Those that do it less than an hour and a half, you really kind of struggle to get it all in. But it's meant to happen probably 65% of the clubs do a Wednesday night club, and they'll run anywhere from 6 o'clock to 7:30 or 6:30 to 8 or something like that. They usually try to get it started as early as they can so the kids aren't out so late. Sunday programs, I got Sunday programs that start at 4 o'clock. I've got some that start at 5 o'clock. I got some that don't start until 6 o'clock. But the whole thing usually runs about an hour and a half. And again, some of the bigger churches, we got churches with 15 kids, and we have a church that runs over 800 kids in their program. So I've got one church that has 200 cubbies alone. So it just, so they take 2 full hours to get through 200 cubbies. So that's really, and then we have some that they do it different nights because they have so many kids. They'll do one club one night, a different club another night. The time you do it is determined by you, the church. It's determined by what works best for Lighthouse Baptist. Is it going to be a Wednesday? Is it going to be a Sunday? I have Thursday night clubs. I have Monday night clubs. So it's really what's going to work for you based on this church, the community, whether you got people driving in from real far, if everybody's close by, all those things you have to consider when you're trying to determine your time and the night that you're going to do the ministry. So, yes, sir.
How does this play in with kids that come in that are visiting or unchurched?
Right. That's one of the purpose of the entrance booklets. These are fairly inexpensive, so a visitor, first place they're going to start, if they're a cubby, they would start here. If they're a Sparky, you're going to give them one of these. So every club has one of those entrance booklets, and that's the first place a child's going to start. So if you only get them 1 or 2 times, what are they getting right up front? They're getting the gospel. Okay. Hopefully they're going to come back, especially if they have a good time. Hopefully somebody's invited them. Within the ministry, you'll see in the handbooks the kids to get passed off on what we call sections in their books. They got to bring friends. So there's outreach built right into the ministry, and that if they want to pass a particular section, they got to bring a friend with them. Now, we used to say to Awana, but we broadened that. We said, we don't care. Bring them to Awana, bring them to your Sunday school, bring them to church. They just have to bring them here, okay, to any of your services. So, yes, ma'am. That's up to you. It can. Some clubs set it up differently. Like every club might have a person that's in charge of that club, and that person would be in a room all night with them. But then you have some people that volunteer. Like when you need that ratio of 1 to 5 is when they're doing their handbook time. When they're doing that Bible memory time, that's when you need that help. When you're in large group time or you're in game time, you don't need as many people involved. So what happens a lot of times, you'll have some volunteers that say, I'll just volunteer for that handbook time to listen to Bible verses. So, and that's their only commitment. So they're there, they could be there the whole night. They could listen to one group, and then they could move to another group, because you're going to kind of stagger the kids. Everybody won't be doing the same thing at the same time. Like game time, if you have enough little ones, you want them to have their own game time. You don't want them to have to play with the older kids. So while they're in game time, maybe the older group's in handbook time, and then they change out. The younger go to game time, the olders come to handbook time. So that's part of the scheduling you would have to work out. So the people can go. Some of your leaders you need all night and all parts of that. You need dedicated leaders for that large group time to teach lessons and to help with discipline. Same thing in game time. But you need the most help when you're doing that Bible memory work. Yes, ma'am. There's online training that's available, or there's me and my wife or someone else coming out here to your church to train you. So right now we're finishing up. This Saturday will be our 6th big training conference in Jessup, Georgia. We've done 5 others during this last month and a half, and we probably, by the time we're done next Saturday, we will have trained about 1,200 leaders. So we do those all summer. Well, starting in August, we did one every Saturday in August, and we're doing these first 2 Saturdays in September. So, mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Right, this is set up for the length of the school year, basically, is the way the ministry was set up for 9 months. Or what we always say is schedule, you need about 32 weeks of Awana. We always say schedule about 36 because you're going to have things that happen. But try to get in 32, and there's no magic to that. That number is just a number that we know that the kids wouldn't, if one of the goals will be for every child to finish a handbook. For them to do that, they need about that 32 weeks. But you can start any time, because in the training, what we're going to tell you is don't get wrapped up on that they have to finish that handbook. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is if they don't know Christ, they're going to come to know Him. If they know Christ, they're going to grow in their relationship with Him. And they can do that without finishing a handbook. So yeah, you can start. I had a club start last March. They only went March, April, and May. And they said, well, we know we're not going to get far, but we want to jump in, get our feet wet, and then they're having a great year already this year. So.
Expound on her first question about teaching the leaders. How long does it take from beginning to end for them to be trained? And do the leaders train the helpers?
Well, we typically will do if we do a Saturday training, we do a 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. with a lunch in the middle of that training. That's what we kind of like. A lot of times we'll finish early, but we like to ask for more time so we can make sure we get everybody equipped. And usually at that training, like if you're going to do the younger clubs, we would bring at least 2 trainers, and then we would all be together for half of that. And then after lunch, we would divide up. Someone would train the 2 younger clubs, Puggles and Cubbies, because their training's a little bit different when you really get into how they do everything. And then Sparks and TNT, we would have another trainer for that because those are very similar. So the other time we do a lot of trainings is Sunday afternoons because everybody's got a busy schedule. So a lot of times we'll say, okay, let us come in after the service, feed your workers, and then we go right into the training, and we are done before, well, usually around 5:30 before evening service, if you have an evening service. Just one? Yeah. Yeah. The more, we like 4 hours to 6 hours. We can do it in probably 3 hours if we really fly through the material, but that's, and again, then you're not going to, it's a learning curve. You're going to get that training, and most people that get it, they go like, wow. The best learner is getting in there and doing it, and so, but yeah, we do offer training. We'll come out, like I said, we'll come out to you. I've got a training. Our last conference is this Saturday, but the 3 Saturdays after that I already have booked for other churches. So if we get a bunch of churches in one area, we try to get them together. If not, we do individual training. So, yes, sir.
Besides the training, is there any other resources or support offered to help get it going?
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of free online training you can do. Like I said, we don't have to do it, but that's up to you. You can really get all the resources off of awana.org, and you can self-train if you want to. In addition to that, we're kind of the missionary in the field. We have 4 of us here in Georgia. I'm in charge of this state, but any of our missionaries, you can pick up and call them and ask them, and they'll be willing to help you with anything. So, and actually, we're adding a missionary into Waycross area. He just started last week, but he won't actually be out training and serving churches until he raises his support. Because Awana doesn't pay us. We're faith-supported missionaries, so we all have to raise our own funds to do what we do. So. Yeah, there's the middle school ministry we call Trek, and then the high school ministry we call Journey. So, yeah, it goes all the way through the 12th grade, and then we actually have adult handbooks that correspond with the kids, because one of the things we encourage you guys to do if you do the ministry is, guess what? You need to be an example to the kids, so you should be memorizing scripture too. You're going to naturally memorize a lot of their verses as you go through it with them, so you have an option of doing the adult version of their books, so you can kind of go right along with them. Plus, that encourages them, because you're not saying do what I say and not what I do. Right? So, good questions. What else do you have? I haven't heard the cost question yet. Oh, you did? Okay. Well, the cost varies. It depends on how you do it. The recommended method is that a church would handle all the administrative side of the ministry, which there's a $99 registration fee. Annually, every year, there'll be a $99 registration fee that you pay. And then, in addition... Yes, ma'am. And then in addition to that, it's just whatever materials you need. Typically, the way we recommend it is the church would handle all the awards and all of that. The church would pay for all of that. Parents, we usually like parents to pay something, because if you just give stuff out, what happens? So typically, we would ask parents to be responsible for 2 things. We usually ask them to be responsible for the uniform and for the handbook. And anything above that you want, you can do. But for a typical uniform and a handbook, you're probably looking at about $25. I usually say $35, because the older uniforms are about $20 a piece and the books are $9. So I usually say parents plan on about $35 per child. Most churches will discount that with the more children that they have, but that's kind of a parental cost. What would the cost of the church be? Almost the same thing. If a child went all the way through their book and they earned every patch or every badge At the end of the year, they either get a ribbon or a plaque or a trophy. The higher they go, the more that cost. But the average would be no more than $35 per child for the church as well. And again, that's probably on the high side, but I'd rather tell you higher and not have you mad at me later if you spent a little more. So.
So you could just say, if you want to enroll your child in Awana to our church, it's $35 enrollment fee.
Yeah, you can do a $25 enrollment. You can do a $35 enrollment. It's up to you. It's up to you. A lot of churches also will do this. They'll do what they call dues for the kids. They teach them to, it's really, I don't like to use the word dues, but that's what most of them call it, but you're teaching the kids to bring a tithe into club when they come, and you have a bucket or whatever you do, and they drop it in it, and you do what you want with those funds. Those funds can go right back into the ministry to help offset cost, or they can go into, you know.
We did something similar. We had them, they brought in their offering, we called it, and that was,
So, I usually tell every church, because usually the church has to buy this stuff up front. It's going to, depending on the number of kids and what groups, you're going to spend probably $600, $800 right up front to get enough material to get you running, and that'll carry you a good ways. That doesn't, it's not uniforms, but that's handbooks and awards and everything. So.
I don't remember you covered this, but like, let's suppose that, I don't know if we can yet, and we'll have to talk about this as a church, but if we went to an hour and a half, let's suppose, we did an hour in here, isn't there an encouragement of Awanas to go back there and have adults go back there with the kids and help them learn Bible verses and stuff like that? Is that a time set aside? Or?
That's part of that hour and a half. That's what we call that handbook time.
Yeah.
So, and again, depending on when you do it, some churches, they'll start Awana before church, so more people can get involved in that part of the ministry. And then, so it really depends on how you structure it. Like I said, some people, especially our senior adults, will say, I can't give you an hour and a half. I can't be with them that long tonight. But they'll give you 30 minutes to listen to verses. So. All right. Other questions I can answer for you? Yes, ma'am.
the badges, the rewards, were they given like quarterly or something, or is they given to the children as they do them? Like, one of them finishes their book or something, I'm going to have somebody that you always get the reward with the badge in, or do you have like a presentation service like one or
Usually most churches will save the major award, like the year-end, the book award. They'll save that for a ceremony at the end of the year. But as kids earn, like for Sparkies, they earn jewels. For TNT, they earn patches. For Cubbies, they're patches. As they earn those individual awards, you give them to them. Some churches delay it a week, but the encouragement is that if they earned it tonight, you want your paycheck when the payday comes, right? So when they earn that, if you can give it to them that night, that would be great.
and that's one of the way the uniforms, because they put their awards.
That's one of the purpose of the uniforms is it's a place to display all of their awards, except when they get those trophies and plaques at the end. But the other reason is discipline. Any of our military and our police and fire department, they all have uniforms because it brings unity and discipline and structure to it. And so same thing with wearing the uniforms in Awana. They're not required anymore. They used to be required. They're not required. You don't even have to use them. But I tell every church, though, if you want to be disciplined and structured, they really do help. I mean, I can be asked to go to a church that has Awana to come speak or just to visit them, and I'll get there early and sit in the parking lot, and I know before I go in that building by watching the kids go in, if everybody's going in and nobody has a uniform, I get in there, I know it's going to be chaos. If I see a lot of uniforms going in, sometimes I'm fooled because they got them in their bag and they hadn't put them on yet. But if I go in there and there's a lot of uniforms, usually it's going to be a pretty orderly club. It does make a difference. So, but the other option you have is, if you don't want to use our uniforms, make your own. Make your own. Use colors, do anything you want, but have something so that there's structure there. Yes, sir.
You ever, if you got several kids that's going to get an award or a badge or something, would you bring them up in front of the congregation and give them their award when they be recognized?
A lot of churches will do that. What happens is you have what we call an opening ceremony and a closing ceremony. The opening ceremony kind of sets the stage for the night. Like opening ceremony, you would begin with a pledge to the American flag, and after that, everything's kind of optional. But we have an Awana flag. You could pledge to that. A lot of people pledge the Christian flag and the Bible. They do 4 pledges. Then they pray, then they dismiss. Closing ceremony, again, it's like 5 minutes or less. That's when you bring them up for their awards. Some churches will actually, and it depends on the pastor, bring them back into the sanctuary in front of the whole congregation for that award presentation. For those that it's not convenient to do that, periodically they might do that, but not maybe every night bring them in front of the church.